Hey, what's up everybody? Colt45 here. And I'm actually making 3 videos this day. 2 reviews and 1 rage video. I just got done with the rage video. It's uploaded on YouTube right now because I just got done with it. And I was gonna do a little rage video on Robin Williams' on this article I read on Robin Williams' passing, but it's just stupid journalists being stupid journalists. So I just sort of let it go. But the reason why I've been sort of sheltered away from YouTube on uploading videos is actually because I've been researching a lot of Shadowrun lately. Now this video isn't about Shadowrun, but I'm just explaining why. I've been going with my friends, and we've been doing a lot of research on Shadowrun and D&D and all the tabletop RPGs. But that's not why I'm here. Why I'm here is because fairly recently, sometime last month, I got my hands on the Sunken DLC, and for Dark Souls 2, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about it because it was actually really good. It was actually I wasn't expecting something like that because it actually had a legitimate challenge in this one, because the main problem with Dark Souls 2 was that it was for the most part easy. It's the easiest of the series. There were many things that you could exploit to make the game tremendously easier, and it was just ultimately there specifically for PvP, which I'll give them credit where credit is due. The PvP is a lot better in this game than all the other ones. There are a lot of rules and regulations to it, but it moves a lot more fluently. But then they decided that they were going to do a whole DLC trilogy. That's Crown of the Sunken King, Crown of the Old Iron King, which is coming out 2 days from now, on the 26th of August. And Crown of the Old Ivory King. Well, not Old Ivory King, but Crown of the Ivory King. Now, problem right off the bat. There was something that was released during the hype train of Dark Souls 2, where they said that they didn't want to do DLCs. They wanted to actually ship the game out complete with every single area that you can go to, even if it was planned as a DLC, they were just gonna put it in anyway. I believe they were just sort of gonna put it in anyways and just ship it out as complete as it possibly can, and then scrap all the other stuff that they didn't have time for, or they just flat out didn't like, or anything like that. So right off the bat, I was kind of betrayed. I felt kind of betrayed because I'm like, okay, well, you just promised me that you were just going to get a complete game, but now you're releasing not 1, not 2, but 3 DLCs. And I doubt this is from popular demand. I think this is just a marketing technique by Namco Bandai. But it is very straightforward how you get to the DLC, and that kind of bothers me because the whole game of Dark Souls and Demon Souls, not so much Dark Souls 2, but it's based on shared knowledge. It's based on everything being cryptic but fair, but possible. Nothing too out, and it makes sense either for lore purposes or whatever. Like in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC for Dark Souls, which I'm thinking about doing a review of, since it's the best DLC I've ever experienced in my entire life. But basically, how you get into that is you go down to the Darkroot Basin, you kill the Hydra. You don't have to kill the Hydra, but it helps tremendously if you do. You go kill a yellow crystal golem, talk to a girl that pops out of him, named Dusk. Talk to her, say yes, because it gives you an option saying yes or no to a question that she asks. You go over to the beach line, right next to the Hydra that you just killed, summon her. That's the only summon sign that you can summon. with where you don't have to be human. Talk to her again and go over to the Duke's archives, kill the crystal golem in the beginning of the Duke's archives, and then go back to that same crystal, where that same crystal golem was that had dusk in it, and then you'll access the DLC that way. In this, it's after you kill the Rotten in the Black Gulch. You go down to the primal bonfire, and it's right there. Like this little altar with the snakes, and it looks kind of cool. But all you have to do is just touch an altar, and you're already in the DLC, which I think is kind of stupid. And it just sort of takes the fun out of it. With that aside, the actual design of the area is really familiar. It's really Aztec. And that was their inspiration, and that shows. I'm not saying this is bad, but this really does stand out. And the whole area is actually really fun. It's got the richest lore that Dark Souls 2 has to offer, and the enemies are really cool looking. They have really awesome weapons. Like there's the Sunken mace that you can poison people with. It's like this huge poisonous mace, but it also poisons you, so it has like a little risk versus reward thing to it, which I kind of like. And the whole thing, they try to make it really maze-like. Like you have all these buildings that can either ascend or descend, and it's all controlled by switches, and the whole area is practically impossible to explore without a bow or any sort of ranged attack, because there are switches through little narrow slits in the wall, or there are switches that you can only get to by aiming a bow and shooting at it, or there are switches that you can only access by standing on the lower ground and shooting a bow and arrow at it. So it excludes a lot of builds, and that bugs me. And that's another problem with Dark Souls 2, is that I'm not sure if I've mentioned or not. It excludes a lot of the builds, like the heavier builds, and it's primarily the heavy builds, the really heavy builds, the builds I like to do, like Hovel, like Hovel's armor, Hovel's great shield, having a lot of poison, a lot of defense, and a lot of attack power. That's the kind of builds I like to do. But it seems Dark Souls 2 is putting a lot more emphasis on lighter and lighter builds. And some of the rings in there, like Yord's ring and another ring, I'm not sure. If you have I can't remember what it does exactly, but it increases attack power the lower your equipment load is, or something like that, which it's kind of obvious what they're trying to do from that point. But the whole area is actually really fun. And that's really the biggest thing in the Crown of Sunken King, is that it's fun. With the exception of the bosses. But we'll get to those later. You have all these enemies, like these Sanctum Knights. You also have the Drakeblood Knights, which have a lot of the player AI, the player movesets, instead of just the enemy movesets. You have these little sorcerers that do a lot of hex damage and whatnot, and the really cool enemies, and I thought it was really awesome, and I really want to see more of this. So add a lot of danger to life. It added a lot of, not to life, but it added a lot of danger when playing, and really got my adrenaline pumping, and that's why I like playing Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and Dark Souls 2, is because it gets my adrenaline pumping. And I like that. I like the essence of being in danger constantly. I like the idea of at any moment a player can come in and ruin my shit. I like that idea. I think it's great. It gives me either a chance to either run away or fight the guy. And with the new build I'm doing in Dark Souls, I'm getting more and more confident fighting the people. But this one isn't really more focused on PvP. It's a lot more focused on PvE, which is something that it really needed, it really needed to break away from PvP for a while and focus more on PvE. So that's the part that was really lacking. But anyways, I've rambled on enough. These enemies are like these little ghosts, and it's cool is that you can actually harm them with magic, but you can't do any physical attacks, and I believe you can't block them. Like, you can't block their attacks, they'll just go right through your shield, which is really cool. Really cool, actually. And the only way you can actually hurt them with physical attacks is you have to find their bodies and destroy them. Which they have this little red aura coming from them, but the fun is getting there, getting to the bodies, especially when there's a room of 5 or 6 of them. You have to run around and attack all the bodies, but then you can attack them, and even then they're kind of easy. And then there's also this weapon that they have. It's kind of like the Avalon, except it does dark damage. It's like a dark Avalon, except it's a lot more towards the dark. And a lot of this is mainly for Hex and Dex builds. A lot of the weapons in this are made for Hex and Dex builds because they have poison scaling, which is dexterity, and you have Hex build, which is faith and intelligence. And there's a lot more miracles and hexes in the DLC, which are really cool, like the death miracle, for example. Like, if you use it and you die, it revives you to 1 hit point. So that way you don't die, but you're very weak. Because in Demon's, it's actually kind of a throwback to Demon Souls, which is the review after this one, where you had a miracle called Second Chance, and you would cast that. But the thing is, you couldn't cast anything else. Like, you couldn't cast any other buffs. You couldn't cast regeneration or anything like that, or Water Veil. All you could cast was one of those at a time. You couldn't cast all 3 of them, which I liked. It balanced it pretty well, for the most part. But you would use that, and if you die, like if you're crossing a bridge and there was a dragon, like in World 1-4, where there's this dragon the blue dragon that's constantly blowing fire on the stairs, all leading up to King Alant, you could use that, go through it, and get hit by the fire, and if you die, you'll revive back to half health, and you can roll and run the rest of the way up there, which is kind of cool. And I like the same idea here, and I like the idea that it's only 1 hit point, because then you have to escape and then heal and then go back. You can't just, I could just tank this out real quick, like you could in Demon Souls. Now, the problem with the DLC is the bosses. I don't like the bosses. A lot of the bosses are really cheap, and the only one that's actually not cheap, that's actually kind of cool, is Sin the Slumbering Dragon. That one actually offered up a challenge, and it wasn't impossible, it was just really hard. And it wasn't cheap. When I played it, I was really angry, and I said, this thing is cheap. Then I really looked back on it, and it wasn't cheap. And the whole problem was, the reason why I've been dying a lot in that whole entire DLC was because I was a new game +5, and everything gets significantly harder. But there are 2 other bosses in this. There is the Squalid Queen, which I forget her name. And also, tangent here, but if there's also another problem with Dark Souls, including the DLC, is that the bosses aren't really memorable. I honestly, all I remember is that frog one. You don't even know the name of it. Like, I can barely remember the name, like the demon of the song and whatnot, but the only reason I remember that name is because I just fought it recently. But anyways, and then you have the Grave Robbers. Picture, now this is the laziest boss fight ever. People say that it's From Software being self-aware of its community, but I think it's just lazy. Granted, it's an optional boss, so you don't have to fight this boss. Well, bosses, I should say. But it's still fucking lazy, and I hate it. Picture if you got invaded, like, or if you were invading somebody, and this is actually what it's referencing here, and you invaded the world of a guy who was a relatively light build with a great bow. Out in the distance, a guy in all hovels armor with a dragon tooth, and a guy dual wielding scimitars in the Alva set, I believe. And they just made that a boss fight. Now, when it comes to the community and what it's referencing, it's actually pretty spot on. As if you go to a lot of the multiplayer sessions, like if you're invading, it's always those three in a nutshell. You have the bow guy, whether it be great bow or small bow, but a guy that hangs back, that has a rapier and a bow, and what he mainly does is he just hangs back and shoots the invader over and over and over again, rings him down with arrows. Then you have the heavy build, like the hovel guy. The guy in all great armor, and a great shield, with a big, huge, great usually something of a great hammer class, but sometimes a great ultra great sword, something that deals a lot of damage and poise damage. Where they are there to break the invader's guard and break their poise and get them into that locking animation. And then you have the dual wielding scimitar guy that'll stun lock them, pretty much, or do really heavy critical hits. That's actually really spot on, but at the same time, that's fucking stupid, and I don't like it. And the other boss, the Squalid Queen, is that she would be great on her own, and if you're a magic class or a cleric, she's actually really easy. You hang back and you throw your lightning and have the NPC summons take care of her or whatever, and she'll summon skeletons and she'll summon Velstadt. There's kind of retextured and everything, and to me that's cheap and that's stupid, because you're just putting a different texture over a boss and sending it at us. And sorry, there's something happening behind this wall, but she herself is actually a fairly challenging foe. She has a halberd. She'll teleport and start using dark magic and chaos flame swathe, which aren't really that hard to dodge, but if you don't dodge it correctly, or if you don't have the right shield for it, it'll take a great amount of damage. But on top of that, you have Velstadt attacking you, skeletons attacking you, and I guess they tried being funny and just having a pig. They had summoning a pig, which I thought, it just happened to me once, and I thought that was hilarious. And then, directly after that boss fight is a bonfire and Sin. And Sin is actually really, really difficult, and I really like that boss battle. So it breathes a mix of fire and poison, which I thought was cool, kind of like Calamite, which was fire and magic, and I thought that was fucking awesome. And that pretty much wraps it up for the review of it. I would recommend it. It's worth the $10, and I'll probably post another review of the Crown of the Old Iron King. So, yeah. This has been Colt 45, and as always, keep playing.